Welcome to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronymus. Laura Kortner is our executive producer, and Anita Brockington, our engineer. Joining us this hour is Dr. Robert Schwebel, a psychologist well known for his authorship of The 7 Challenges, a comprehensive counseling program that addresses drug and alcohol addictions. His book is widely used across the United States, in Canada, and Germany. Dr. Schwebel originally wrote his program, The 7 Challenges, for adolescents and young adults. He's now adapted it to people of all ages. This hour, we'll discuss his soon-to-be-released book in November of 2019 called Leap of Power, Take Control of Alcohol, Drugs, and Your Life, a Viva Press release. Learn how Schwebel's compassionate approach for each person's own journey to wellness, as well as to understanding the roots of substance abuse, the challenges faced in overcoming the addiction, but how, with slow, gradual evaluation of ourselves, any person can gain better control and gentleness towards themselves about these very real-life challenges that millions of people share. Thank you so much for joining us, Robert.
Thank you for having me on your show.
It's a pleasure. So I read through your Leap of Power, and you basically start in a place where not all people think to start. You start off by saying you have to be honest with yourself. So why don't we start there, too, and then we'll back up a little bit and talk about all your years of work as a psychotherapist that resulted in these works.
Okay, great. Well, to me, it's kind of like New Year's resolutions. On New Year's Eve, everybody wants to lose 10 pounds, and they're going to start exercising. And there's a real question of, do we mean it? Are we really willing to give up the strawberry shortcake? Are we going to give up? Are we going to stick with it? How hard are we willing to work? There's so many questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're doing self-change, because no one else is watching us. If we're doing self-change, we're watching ourselves. So, clearly we have to be honest with ourselves.
And it's a rather elaborate list. I mean, you write these books, and then there's lots and lots of tips about it, but just being honest with ourselves doesn't really do justice, I think, to all the different aspects of what that means.
No, it doesn't. One of the things I actually talk about is the importance of developing what I call a challenging voice. The challenging voice is our self-talk that asks kind of the questions that I already mentioned. It says, for example, with drugs, if you've been using drugs to calm down when you're angry, are you really willing to give up that coping mechanism? The challenging voice might ask, next, you said you want to either set new limits or quit using drugs. Does that include next time when you're feeling very angry and you don't feel that you have any way to cope with it other than drugs? So the challenging voice actually is a supportive voice. It's not cruel, trying to put us down, although, as you know, people with drug problems are so often put down. But the challenging voice is supportive, trying to push us to be honest with ourselves, to face the reality so that we can succeed with our own decisions.
Well, and I like your approach is so kind. Oftentimes when anybody wants to make a change in their life, particularly something as difficult as an addiction, there's a great deal of self-doubt, a great deal of self-criticism. You don't only just hear it from the people around you, particularly if in some way you've harmed your relationships or harmed them physically, but people have, as you point out, an oppressive self-talk, which is very undermining.
Yes. Well, I mean, first of all, other people are pretty, other than people who have the problems themselves, are very brutal about drug problems. They're viewed as, people with drug problems are viewed as having character flaws. They're druggies, they're failures. There's so many put-downs that people say, and then people with the problems begin to internalize that. In fact, one of the worst put-downs is the idea that you're powerless over drugs. I mean, that's a horrible thing. And then people begin to say to themselves, I am powerless. There's nothing I can do. I am a failure. I've tried to quit, and I failed. So that we're kind of brutal to ourselves, and I think the public is particularly brutal. There's a long history of viewing drug problems as moral failures. And really, the much more modern thinking is that people use drugs in response to the conditions of their lives, and that we have to support people in understanding what's going on in their lives and help them to make their lives better so that they don't have to rely on drugs.
Yeah, or alcohol or any other
Yeah.
kind of addiction.
And I should say, though, that when I say drugs, I absolutely, often, in fact, I use the term alcohol or other drugs.
Right, exactly. Well, it's important because we have a culture, while we suffer from alcoholism far more than drug abuse, until we add in the pharmaceutical drug abuse, which is the biggest drug abuse. But alcoholism has sort of been, part and parcel of the economy, and it's available everywhere and by almost anyone of any age. And it must be a really difficult addiction to overcome, given that it's accessible so easily and part of our social contract, in the way people relate to each other or go out to dinner or go to a business meeting or whatever it is. Alcohol is like part of the shtick, so to speak.
Well, there are astounding statistics that compare the number of deaths from alcohol in the millions in the past 20 years to the number of deaths from opioids, which is in I guess, around 200,000. So you're absolutely right. I mean, alcohol is a huge, huge problem. And people use alcohol for really the same reasons they use street drugs, for pleasure and to cope with pain. And because it's legally accepted, people get in deeper and deeper. It just makes it more accessible, and it's really part of our culture.
Yeah, and the horror of the alcohol abuse is that then people get in cars and they go and kill other people.
Yes.
With a lot of the street drugs, people pretty much, return to an inner life experience. They don't leave the parking lot, as the joke goes.
Uh-huh.
But people who drink get out there. They can be very violent. They can be extremely aggressive, harm their partners, harm strangers. And it's a problem that isn't really addressed with the same kind of, I don't feel anyway, although the 12-step program certainly has helped millions of people. I don't look at our society as addressing alcohol addiction with the same kind of aggression and diminishment of character, because the power brokers all drink. So who's going to put that down?
Yes, well, the power brokers are, so many people use drugs in safe ways, and oftentimes the power brokers are using alcohol or other drugs, in fact, in safe ways. I think the criticism...
Well, that part's true.
It's really interesting because drug use has the potential of being a high-risk behavior depending on how people do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that, if somebody rides motorcycles or plays tackle football, they're engaged in a high-risk behavior. But if they want health care, it's a sure shot that they'll get it. And they won't be criticized in the way someone who has a drinking problem or an alcohol problem might be criticized.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, we'll start out here with, again, going back to a little bit more about being honest with yourself. In each of your chapters, what's lovely about it, like in this one, there's self-help or there's counseling. There's feedback from others. This isn't something one has to try to do by themselves. It's very difficult to do this on your own.
Yes, it is. And it's interesting because I was thinking about that just today, and actually was in a conversation with someone talking about it, that statistically, more people overcome alcohol and other drug problems on their own, actually, without 12 steps and without any type of therapy. The problem is that a lot of damage can happen before they overcome their drug problems. So which means that we ought to offer counseling to people who do have the problems.
And, of course, that's a shortage we face in this country. There aren't very many places people can literally go, particularly if they're in dire straits. There just aren't many clinics. So anyway, in your being honest with yourself, you ask, can a person look at themselves and their actions and admit to the problems and mistakes? And then you said, can you muster up a challenging voice that wants you to know the naked truth about your addiction, how much you use, how often, how it benefits you, how it harms you, and where you seem to be headed? I like that you orient your questions for the person who would use your work, not just to the past, but also to the future.
Yes, there is so much. There is so much self-blame, and it makes it very hard for people to admit problems. It makes it very hard for them to take a look at what's going on right now in their lives, and it makes it equally hard to think about, well, where is this going to lead if I keep doing what I'm doing? What's my life going to be like down the line?
So you said that the important thing, even in this very beginning stage when you're trying to you're not judging, the important thing is get rid of the judging voice, get rid of the diminishing voice, get rid of the one who's beating you up inside or what you hear from others, and just ask yourself, what do you want, right? That's a big part of it.
Yes, why would people admit to problems if they felt, well, once I admit to problems, I'm going to put myself down? Or if they feel, well, if I admit to problems, then I'm going to have to face the fact that there's nothing I can do about it because I'm powerless. Why should I admit to problems? Because when I have setbacks, I'm just going to be mean to myself and put myself down. It's so important that we develop really a nurturing voice that's supportive, that allows us to look at what we're really doing and to accept that everyone makes mistakes and we can be making mistakes in terms of our use of alcohol and other drugs. That we have to accept the reality, be honest with ourselves, and if we have a nurturing voice, we can accept that that's part of life. We can take a look at it, and we can decide that we want to do something about it.
Right, and so you suggest in this very first step of basically looking at ourselves honestly as you write down words of your oppressive self-talk, oh, I'm a failure, oh, I'm really messing it up, oh, I didn't become what I thought I would be, or whatever it is. And then also the nurturing self-talk of I'm a good human being, I wish I could overcome this, whatever it is.
Yes. And I think there's a big distinction, by the way, Zoe, in terms of, and this not only applies to people who are struggling with alcohol and other drug problems, but people who are trying to make any sort of changes in their lives. There's a real distinction between people who put themselves down when they have a setback and people who say, look, setbacks are part of life. I want to learn from this setback. I want to figure out what happened. I accept that I had this setback. I want to figure out what I can do differently in the future so that I can have a better life, so that I can learn from this.
Right. So you call these challenges, and that was challenge one of just looking at ourselves honestly. The second challenge you say is to look at what a person likes about alcohol or drugs or other addictions and why they use them. Because you said in order to know what we like is the beginning of us looking at what it's masking or what it helps us survive.
Yes. I mean, typically when people think about making decisions to change their drug use behavior, typically what they think about is the harm from drugs. And in fact, they often make decisions to change simply because they want the harm to go away. But the interesting thing about that is, people who have drug problems know they've been harmed. They know how harmful drugs are, and yet they still don't change. They still don't succeed in making changes. And what I like to say is that's because they've made uninformed decisions. They've made half-baked decisions, so to speak. They're deciding to quit to make the harm go away without really having an understanding of what the benefits are from drug use. That's the reason people keep using drugs despite the harm. And the question we really have to ask, anyone with a drug problem really has to ask themselves is, what is it about drugs that is so compelling? What is it that I like so much that I keep coming back for more despite the harm? And people discover that, they're using drugs to deal with anxiety, to calm down when they're anxious, or to fall asleep at night when they can't fall asleep, or to deal with depression, or to manage their anger, or to feel comfortable at a party when they're feeling awkward. That people are using drugs for any number of reasons. Drugs provide pleasure, and they provide relief from pain. So it's a natural human response to want to take drugs. So if you really want to make progress in overcoming a drug problem, it actually starts with understanding what you like. What are the benefits you're seeking? Then, when you know what you want and what you're after, you then have the alternative of trying to figure out other ways to satisfy those needs.
That's what I like so much about this book, Leap of Power, Take Control of Alcohol, Drugs, and Your Life, because you're really right. This can be applied to any change that somebody wants to make, whether it's in a relationship that's not healthy or a job that doesn't match up to what it is really your passion or desire to do in the world, or in this case, an addictive substance. So we'll be right back. If you're just joining us, our guest is Dr. Robert Schwebel, Schwebel. His book, Leap of Power, Take Control of Alcohol and Drugs in Your Life. And you can learn more at his website, www.7challenges.com. That's www.7challenges.com.
Hi, this is Skylar Wilson, co-author and co-founder of the Order of the Sacred Earth and Wild Awakenings. You can learn more about us at orderofthesacredearth.org and wildawakenings.com. And you're listening to the 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronymus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronymus. Dr. Robert Schwebel is with us. His book, Leap of Power, Take Control of Alcohol, Drugs, and Your Life, a 2019 release. Learn more at his website, www.7challenges.com. So, Robert, coming back to what you name as challenges, we've mentioned the first one is to be honest with ourselves, to look at our life, including our use of substances or other things we want to change. And then you say to look at challenge 2, in this case, drug benefits or alcohol or some other behavior, challenging ourselves to look at what we like about the substance, the behavior, or the situation, and why, in this case, we use them. The third one, you say, is to challenge ourselves to look at the harm that has happened or could happen from our use of alcohol, other drugs, or even relationships.
Yes. And basically, that's how people, it's kind of the public health model for decision making. You said it before the break, that this applies to all kinds of behaviors, that essentially when we're deciding whether we want to change a behavior or not, we look at the benefits on the one hand, and we compare that with the harm from the particular behavior. And ultimately, that's how we make decisions. Now, they're not always rational decisions, and sometimes, people with drugs are, like with adolescents, for example, they're saying the benefit is nobody can control me, and I don't care, and that's why I like to use drugs. Well, that's kind of a tough one to argue with, but essentially what people are doing is they're comparing the benefits versus the harm. And as I was saying before, people get in trouble when they try to make decisions only based on the harm, because they forget, maybe they stop using a drug, and then suddenly they can't fall asleep that night. And then they think, well, I made a real decision I was going to quit, but oops, I used because I hadn't really thought it through. I hadn't really understood that when I quit using drugs, yes, the harm goes away, but so do the benefits. And I was blindsided. I couldn't fall asleep, and there I was smoking weed again or whatever particular drug the person was using to deal with insomnia.
And as you point out, oftentimes when people want to make changes, we can get caught in that sort of repetitive brain trauma that says it's not going to change that much, why bother, why leave this job, I'll just find another job that's horrible, or why stop drinking because I'm just going to have a horrible time everywhere and I won't go anywhere, or whatever it is. So when a person first does the being honest with themselves, to look at the whole life, not just at the substance or the behavior, and then you say to analyze the benefits you get from the behavior or the substance or the situation, and then to look at the harm that has already happened and what could happen harmfully to yourself. It's not always just to other people, it's to your own life and what it is you hope to do with your lifetime. You then go to the fourth challenge, which is shared responsibility. So fill that in for us.
Yes. Well, the idea, actually, I started writing about shared responsibility largely because there's this huge tendency to blame, criticize, and put down everybody with alcohol and drug problems, which is one of the reasons why people don't even tend to go to help until things are very, very serious. they expect, in fact, that when they go, they're going to be judged, they're going to be put down, they're going to be told what to do, they're going to be told, well, there's only one solution, and it's immediate abstinence, and we have a program, and you need to do it. I mean, people have these horrible expectations because they're so criticized and so judged. So when I talk about Challenge 4 and shared responsibility, I'm saying it's really important to help people put their drug use in perspective, to look at what's been going on in their lives that has led them to use drugs, to try to take away some of the stigma and the shame that keeps people from being honest, in fact, and from facing up to their problems. So a big part of Challenge 4 is helping people understand their drug use in the context of what's been going on in their lives. The dramatic example of that, of course, is that with so many people with drug problems, they had a trauma history in their life. And, in fact, they're using drugs to deal with the pain, to try to forget, to try to cope. I mean, that's sort of one of the bigger examples. But people are using drugs also because they're unhappy on their jobs, because they are doing poorly in school, they don't have support in school. And then there's social conditions, poverty, racism, that impinge and harm people and diminish the quality of their lives. There's so many things that go on that make people feel bad. So they want a little pleasure. They want a little relief from the pain. And in a sense, what we really want to do is help people look at their drug use so that they can explain it, even if it reaches problematic levels, without passing negative judgments on themselves.
I also like that it's important in this analysis that one does with oneself is to go back before the use began, to
Yes.
go back before the problem started. Because as you point out, some people can just limit their use of what other substance or situation they may be addicted to. And I like to say a lot of people are addicted to beta brainwaves. That's the fight or flight, the either or, that I'm going to beat you up if you don't agree with me. That's politics. That's the beta brainwave. There is an addictive component to not only people who participate in it, but people who drive that down the street, like the media. They love the beta brainwave, and it is the lowest form of brainwave that we can be in, and that drives people to use drugs because we're in this constant fight or flight advertisement state of being, especially in this country.
Yes, and it's interesting what you're saying, because in the old days, everyone said drug addiction is all about drugs. And I think more and more people are talking about addiction in the sense you are. And, for example, they're talking about gaming addiction and gambling addiction.
Yeah, sex
all
addiction.
All kind of behaviors that, that we're seeking pleasure and relief from pain. I do in the book, I talk about what I call the right now brain. And that's the part of us that, from the point of view of evolution, in the old days when we're roaming around and hungry and there's fruit on the tree, you grab it and you eat. And that's the part of the brain that wants immediate satisfaction, immediate pleasure. Well, that hasn't gone away. It's still there. And in a sense, addiction is fed from that brain. And in fact, we could say the obesity epidemic is the same thing.
Of course it is.
You eat all the food, and you go to any food source that's available, and with this massive advertising of junk food and all the garbage that's available.
Yeah, it's so available everywhere and anywhere, and the price is so low that you can afford it to relieve your pain, whatever that emptiness is, whatever that need that isn't fulfilled in other ways. And that's what I like so much about this book, Leap of Power, and the way you help other counselors through this book as well as individuals, is that these really are steps each person can take to kind of get a grip on the whole environment of the addiction, whatever the addiction is, or whatever the fear of change is and where it comes from, that it's not always in the just now moment. As you point out, oftentimes people have had childhood trauma or trauma in relationships.
Yes.
Or self-doubt or whatever it is. So we've now gone through to review what we've looked at so far, because again, this book is so detailed, and I really encourage my audience, Leap of Power, Take Control of Alcohol, Drugs, and Your Life, to go to Dr. Schwebel's website, www.7challenges.com. He does make public presentations, and other counselors can use this work when he works with you. Anyway, challenge 1 was, again, to look honestly at ourselves, including our use of substance or other addictions. And you say this is where we just have to look at our life and figure out what's really happening in order to make the best decisions. But then we move forward into how to make the decisions. You say challenge 2 is challenging yourself to look at what you like about the substance or the situation or the addiction, and why you use it, whether it's food, whether it's substance, whether it's person, whether it's activity. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Well, the interesting thing I would add, which is slightly aside from what you just said, but it gets back to what we were talking about a moment ago, that right now brain, that we have something else in our brain, which I call the smart brain, which is the cortex, the prefrontal cortex, that is where this is sort of the key to our success. It's the slow brain. It's the part of our brain that says, okay, right now, brain, you want to smoke that drug or inject that drug. And the smart brain says, wait a minute, stop. Let's think about this. Is this really what I want to do? What are the consequences going to be of doing this? Or in the other addictions that we've been talking about, it's like, oh, that strawberry shortcake would be yummy. But the smart brain says, hold on, I've been weighing myself every day. What am I going to weigh tomorrow?
And so
I just wanted to add in the smart brain to contrast that with the right now brain when it comes to sort of taking control of our lives.
Right. And so your challenge 3 was then to look at the harm we're doing to ourselves and perhaps those around us through these addictive behaviors or addictions to substances, and to look at that honestly. And then we went to challenge 4, which is to look at our responsibility and also the responsibility of others for the problem. And as you pointed out, that can go way back in time.
Yes. And by the way, this doesn't mean that we don't pay attention to the harm that we've caused. I mean, when people have serious drug problems, they certainly cause harm to other people as well.
Of course.
So we have to be fair about that.
Absolutely. I mean, you see that often in domestic violence. There's a great deal of drugs or primarily alcohol often, or the combination thereof involved, or violence to animals. It's also the same kind of, the people like to hunt and kill, to me, is a form of addiction. There's nothing healthy in killing living beings. I'm sorry, to me it's premeditated murder. That's the way I see it. Unless you have to hunt to eat, which most hunters don't have to do. They hunt because they have a bloodlust. That's an addiction.
Yes, well, people are seeking pleasure and they want relief from pain. And sometimes they're not thinking about what they're doing and they're not thinking about the consequences of what they're doing.
And in that case, the pain they're causing the animal community and the family that they butcher and the separation of the matriarchs and their children, et cetera, et cetera. And our extinction ratio. Now it's not even just about, boy, their behavior really irks me. It's, we really can't afford this behavior anymore. We can't afford more killing of our bears and our wolves, or our elk for that matter. All right, so the 5th challenge is challenging yourself to look at where you're headed and where you'd like to go and what you would like to accomplish.
Right. It's about looking to the future. You asked about this before, but you bring it up now in the context. It really follows in the book about Challenge 5. And there's sort of a negative view of Challenge 5 and a positive view of Challenge 5, looking to the future. The negative view is, if I keep doing what I'm doing, where is this going to lead? Will I lose my job? Will I lose my relationship? Will I end up in jail? Will I be addicted? What's the kind of the course, the projection of where I'm headed? That's the negative view of looking to the future. The positive view is something completely different. This has to do with what is possible. What do I want? What is important to me? What is meaningful to me? What do I want to accomplish? Where do I want to be? People begin to think, people sort of start the change process with drugs, at first by, as we talked about, identifying the harm. Okay, they see the harm, and what we need to help people do is that it doesn't lead them to change. People won't change unless they feel their life will be better as a result of the change. So in looking to the future, the positive side of looking to the future is, what do I want to accomplish? Where do I want to end up? Where do I want to go? We need something that is meaningful to us, that's important to us, that inspires us, and by the way, that we feel that we can attain.
Mm-hmm.
So that we're willing to give up drugs. We're giving up the short term of the right now brain in order to accomplish what our smart brain wants, which is some better future for ourselves. And part of the problem in counseling people with drug problems, they've been so beaten down, it's hard to visualize a better future. So
or a sense of personal power. I mean, I think
yes.
That's one of the things that gets eviscerates, particularly if you've tried and you fail and you fall off the wagon, or you use your drug, or you follow your addictive behavior, whatever it is, whether it's, as you pointed out, gambling or overeating or whatever it is, not finishing projects. I mean, there's all kinds of behaviors that are very detrimental to a lifetime that don't have to be substances. But
Yes.
but they all come, I think, from this sense of, I don't have any power. I can't control the future I want.
Well, that's one of the most important points I try to make in the book. I think that people have been told that they're powerless. I mean, you hear it all the time. I'm powerless over drugs. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They begin to believe that they're powerless. They feel powerless. And actually, what I call a leap of power is believing that within yourself, and helping people to believe that somewhere within yourself, you have the power to make a change. We've had this dominant ideology, this dominant belief of powerlessness. I really think we have to deliver a you can do message. You can do it. You are capable of it. And in fact, millions of people have overcome drug problems. Millions and millions of people. It can be done. I don't know why we go around and start telling people who are feeling weak and vulnerable that they're powerless. That's the last message they need to hear.
Exactly. We're going to take our last break of the hour. Dr. Robert Schwebel is our guest. His book, Leap of Power, Take Control of Alcohol, Drugs, and Your Life, a 2019 release. Go to www.7challenges.com. And remember, all our links are at 21stcenturyradio.com and at zoharaonline.com.
Hello, this is Dr. Marianne Teitelbaum, author of Healing the Thyroid with Ayurveda. You can learn more about me and my work at drmteitelbaum, teitelbaum.com. And you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronymus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Dr. Robert Schwebel is with us. His book, Leap of Power, Take Control of Alcohol, Drugs, and Your Life, a 2019 release. Go to www.7challenges.com for more information. So, recapping a little bit of your 7 challenges. Challenge 1 is for us to look honestly at our life, including our use of substance or other injurious behavior that we are addicted to doing, whatever it is, gambling or something else. Challenge 2, you write, Robert, is for us to look at ourselves and ask ourselves, what do we like about alcohol and drugs or our behavior? Why do we do them? And, what do we like about them? Because if we don't look at what we like about them, as you point out, and you don't often hear people say that, oh, look at what you really gain from it, or what you think you gain from it, or what you do.
People think we're encouraging drug use when we say that. No, we're trying to help people understand themselves better.
I think it's just a wonderful addition. I don't often hear that. And then the third challenge you said is, so then we have to look honestly at what harm has happened or could happen if we continue the behavior, whether it's drugs or alcohol or food or any other addiction, gambling, the harm that it does to us, our families, what we want in our life. Then you go challenge 4 is then we have to look at not only our responsibility for these behaviors, but the responsibility of others who have contributed to this behavior, which often comes from things in childhood or bad experiences. Challenge
Yes.
5, you said, we just left that one, is challenging ourselves to look at where we're headed and where we want to go and what we'd like to accomplish. Did we say enough about that?
Well, I think it's just really important, a future orientation, that we don't want to be caught in the here and now. It is really important we think about what we want in the future, and that if we don't have some sense of optimism that we can make a better future for ourselves, why would we even bother to try to change? It's hard work to change.
No matter what change, that's really true.
Yes.
And then the older we are, sometimes the harder it is. Challenge 6, you write, challenging yourself to make thoughtful decisions about your life, including your use of alcohol and other drugs, and I add, or other addictions. And this is, you say, where we put it all together and make informed decisions. So walk us through Challenge 6.
Yes. Well, I mean, a couple of things about it that I think are important. One of the things I say is that we need to make thoughtful decisions about our drug use, but also about our life. The two are inseparable. We're using drugs in response to what's going on in our life, and when we begin to use drugs, it affects what's going on in our lives. So, I like to say there's really no such thing as drug therapy. It really should be holistic therapy, comprehensive therapy that includes attention to the drug problem.
Right. And as you point out, you can ask yourself 2 questions. What problems do I have to start solving to live well without these addictions or the substance?
Yes.
And then you ask, what skills do I have to learn in order to live well without them? Let's talk about that a bit, because I think that's really essential.
Yes. It gets back to what I was talking about before, the harm-based decisions. People make decisions to quit using drugs or to set new limits because they want the harm to go away. Well, if, for example, they've been using drugs to manage their anger and they decide to quit or set limits, one of the skills they'll need to learn is how to manage their anger, or they'll need to solve some problems so they're less angry in their day-to-day lives. These are the sort of things that make work on drug issues really inseparable from any other life issues.
Exactly. So then we get to and I also want to add
one other thing.
Yeah,
really important thing, if I can add that.
Yeah.
I think one of the huge barriers to people getting help for their drug problems has been that there's this ideology that there is really only one way to overcome drug problems, which is you must immediately become abstinent. You walk through the door, you need to be abstinent. And it's ridiculous. You imagine if we were providing counseling for someone who's depressed, and we say, as soon as you walk through the door, you need to be happy. It's preposterous.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've only offered a single solution, and it's not the way the world works. I mean, there's been this idea that it's all or nothing. The truth is, many people are able to set new limits and stick within their limits.
Mm-hmm.
Many people are able to use drugs, but use them in less harmful ways. For example, you mentioned alcohol and driving. People can drink the same amount of alcohol, but decide they're not going to drive under the influence anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So we just have kept people away and given this horrible message. You can't get any help till you're ready to quit, till you're ready to commit to abstinence. And what are we saying, essentially? Come back when you're ready to play ball on our terms. Wait until you hit rock bottom. Horrible thing to say to people.
Exactly.
We should be embracing people, everyone. If you have a drug issue, you should be able to come in somewhere and have someone who listen to you respectfully and let you talk about your life and talk about your circumstances and help you reach your own conclusions about when and how you want to change.
And I like the way you enunciate that for everybody it's not going to be abstinence anyway from whatever it is. It might be curtailing. It might be using it to celebrate. It might be sharing it. I mean, I don't know. That's pure personal decisions. But I like that the main thing you ask is what skills do I have to learn in order to live well, whether I'm going to reduce use of whatever it is or doing, and what other things can replace that sense of pleasure. And you also point out that there's, people can be helped by other people, but if we take away the shame.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it is so important to take away the shame. That's what keeps people away. That's what keeps people from talking about it. It's what, people end up failing because, they try to quit and they have a setback and they're so embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's like, why can't we just welcome people and help them and help them develop a nurturing voice and be a nurturing voice in their lives that say, we're on your side. It's really hard to overcome a drug problem. Okay, you had a setback. You don't need to feel shame. Let's figure out what happened. Let's get to the bottom of it. Let's help you become successful.
Exactly. I mean, I think of all the millions and millions of women in the Western world who think they're failures because they haven't lost weight, because they can't stick to a diet, or they'll try this diet and that diet, and people go, well, how many diets do you have to try? I mean, you can think of so many instances in our culture where people are diminished by the judgment values that others place on the journey of being a human. You know, there's ups and downs in all our lives. There's easy times and hard times.
I like how you put it, the journey of being human.
All right, so now we get to Challenge 7, taking action. This is where you put it all together. So show us how to do that.
Yeah, well, taking action is kind of where the rubber meets the road, and this is really the biggest section of the book. In fact, when people read and they're in Chapter 1, I say, if you really want to quit right away, skip ahead to Chapter 7. This is where you're going to get...
It's kind of fun. Go to the end of the book. I like that, Robert.
Isn't that great? You don't have to read the whole book. But actually, I then add and come back, because people rush to try to quit without laying a solid foundation for success. Come back and figure out why you've been doing what you're doing. Come back and stop blaming and shaming yourself. So I do say come back.
Right.
But in any event, I mean, there's sometimes people just really, really want to get going, and I felt that it's very, very important that we give practical advice and
which you do,
and suggestions about how to be successful. I have this little acronym that I call KARMA. The K is to know your triggers. What are the types of activities or the people or the places or the feelings that make you want to use drugs? Know them. Once you know them, try to avoid them, at least in the beginning, to the extent you can. That's the A of karma. Avoid. The R, the really, really important part of karma, is to resist. And that's one where there's actually a lot of attention in the book about how to resist urges to relapse, how to develop self-talk that's supportive of you, there's something this term I really like, it's called urge surfing. So you feel like using drugs, or we could say you feel like eating that strawberry shortcake. Write it out. It's going to rise, you're going to feel it, and you know what? It goes away.
Yeah. You know, when you're saying it, I'm sitting here thinking about impulse shopping and online shopping and Amazon shopping and how many people's lives are really being injured by this addiction, which we don't often talk about addictions, but it is an addiction.
Yeah, and it gets back to what we talked about earlier, the smart brain. The right now brain wants to push that button and order it, and it's going to be at your door the next day. But the smart brain says, wait a minute, I have to pay for that.
Right. And do I need it? And is it really relevant to our lives? All right, so back to karma. We've done the K, which was know your triggers. A, which was abstinence, was it?
No, it's avoid. Avoid the triggers to the extent that you can. Obviously, there's drugs everywhere around us, but especially in the beginning. All right. Eventually, you have to get some exposure because you have to develop that strength within yourself that you can walk away.
And then the R, we're going to run out of time, so we'll go through these quickly. The R was...
Resist.
Mm-hmm.
The M is monitor. Watch yourself. Every day, you wake up, you say, did I exceed my limits yesterday? Is there something that will put me at risk? Did I have a very close call? And if so, I need to figure out what happened. If I exceeded my limits, I need to figure out what happened. And is there something that puts me at risk of exceeding my limits between now and tomorrow? Every day you ask yourself. And then the A in karma, the second A, is hold yourself accountable, okay? If I had a setback, I'm going to learn from it.
It's wonderful. Your book does such a beautiful job, and you also say you can solve your problem, you can notice, you can stop, you can think. And if you're seeking pleasure, there are other ways to have pleasure. And I always tell people, start walking. Walking is the quickest way, literally, to rewire your brain, because the brain is always signaling the neurons. Thousands of them are firing, and as you walk, you can unwind the memory pattern in your body, but you have to give yourself positive affirmation while you walk and congratulate yourself and know that even your walking is doing something really good for your health, your body, your consciousness, and I'd like to even say the world itself, because when we walk awake, we're endowing every place we walk with our love. I want to thank you, Robert. What a pleasure. Leap of Power. Take control of alcohol, drugs in your life, a 2019 Viva release. Go to www.7challenges.com.
I hope you'll have more happy ever afters. I hope we can all live more fearlessly, and we can
Stay connected and stay informed on the #1 news talk station, Talk Radio 680, WCBM, Baltimore, and WCBM.com.